war news coverage and the Vietnam experience and how we can expand it to today and what we learned from that. During emotionally draining situations, people can easily fall for fake information. The presenters of this topic will talk about misleading media coverage in wartime and focus on the first widely covered war, the Vietnam War. This project was done by Lena, Ellen, Annie, Yelena, and Arina. The microphone is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Our groupmate Arina will just share the screen and we will begin. Can you hear my voice?
Yes.
So now let's look at the role of trust in media in war news coverage. And to do so, we are going to look at the case of the Vietnam War experience. The case study will be presented by Ani Varshikian, Ellen Badalian, Yelena Manukyan, Arina Bostantian, and me, Lena Sahagyan. So as mentioned, during times of wars and other emotionally draining situations, media can greatly impact the perception of the general public and distort truth. And although military journalism and the overall coverage of media and conflicts has about history of several decades, the borders of the information that should be publicized still remain blurry. This is the outline of our presentation. Firstly, I will give some background information about the historical event. Then my groupmates will talk about the trust issues that happened in the aftermath of the war and the critical factors that played their role in it. And after that, we will present the recommendation and also the implementation plan for that recommendation to rebuild trust between the two parties. Next slide, please. So the Vietnam War is also thought to be the first television war because it was the first war in history that has been like thoroughly published and broadcasted through media. And the war was between the communist government of North Vietnam and its allies in South Vietnam, also known as the Viet Cong, and the government of South Vietnam and their principal ally, which was the USA. So the prolonged war that lasted from 1954 to 1975 actually proved to be too costly for the USA in terms of casualties. So in 1973, they had to retreat, and 2 years after that, the South Vietnam finally fell to the full invasion of the North. Next slide, please. So during this time, many people relied on TV as their main source of information and news. And in a sense, TV was the dominant medium of the time. And in his study, Dr. Hammond mentions that at that time, the US government had made an agreement with the press, and the press was actually not entirely under the government control. Furthermore, the media outlets would decide on the material that would be broadcasted on their own, so they were relatively free. And this has led to the distribution of detailed information from the front lines and also some graphic photos and videos from battlefield, which actually gave rise to the theory that the flawed kind of interpretation and the coverage of the war was one of the key factors in the American misfortune. Now my teammate Ali will carry on with the presentation.
The trust issue towards the media during the Vietnam War was the belief that through exaggerated imagery, the media gained sympathy from the public and made them distrust the government. And the consequences of this mistrust led to the polarization among Americans. Many people relied on television for news during the Vietnam War, and the United States government has signed a voluntary cooperation with media outlets. Hence, the press was not entirely under the control of the government and decided on the material that was broadcasted on TV. They shared detailed information from the front lines, accompanied by somewhat graphic pictures and videos. Those stories, plus the announcement of casualties, started an anti-war movement whose cry was to end the war and not to kill any more Vietnamese people and American soldiers. Next slide, please. However, there was a pro-war side whose thesis was about media being guilty of the US misfortunes. The first argument was that media coverage was anti-American and caused US troops to withdraw. And another view was that information broadcast by media was helpful for the communists and was another factor for the US defeat. According to a survey conducted in 2018, 60% of participants mentioned that television caused cynicism and wasn't a trustworthy source at all. The people who believed the media resisted to those who didn't trust the media. American citizens were divided into two groups, and similar split is still seen in American society. So now my groupmate will talk about the critical factors that contributed to it.
Here are the critical factors that contribute to part of United States citizens not to trust media. The first factor is United States defeat. United States defeat caused the theory that media was to blame for United States defeat, let's say. And this has led to another factor, which is political polarization. Many people, particularly those on the right wing of the American politics, believe media to be responsible for the loss. And one critical player that does contribute this factor is United States government. They were very vocal in blaming the press for not being on their side. As we can see in the next slide, President Richard Nixon has said, "Our worst enemy seems to be the press." And he continued his thought saying that he entered the presidency with less support from the press than any other United States president. Well, such high-profile people like Richard Nixon contributed to people not trusting media, and others like this were high-profile politicians, political parties, and even high-rank military personnel. One of them being Lieutenant General Philip B. Davidson. If you change the slide, please. We can see him in this picture. He published a book which was called The Vietnam at War History. He said in this book that media shared exaggerated pictures which were very horrible and scared the American people. These people made the United States to abandon Vietnam. So influential people here like General Davidson also affect people into thinking that media was to blame for United States defeat and not anything else. And now I will get it to my colleague, Yelena.
Thank you. The media during the Vietnam War, as we could see, lacked the trust of people who were in support of the war and the US government. That is because they firmly believed that media of the war started protests in the country and gave information to the enemy. Political polarization is one of the significant reasons that creates trust toward the media, distrust toward the media. So polarization in American society is a critical problem that is still relevant today. Therefore, different media networks should stop contributing to this polarization and find means of attracting and giving truthful information from diverse political backgrounds, which eventually would make them trust. However, it is important to note that by being totally unbiased, which is indeed in the ideal case here, the news media risks having financial loss. And next slide, please. So in a 2021 survey, the answers of the respondents visualized political issues when it comes to trusting the news, and some of their answers also fit our case. So in order to increase trust for media, news networks should not express political bias that will not be agreed by others. They should identify political biases. They should have more politicians as guests from different political backgrounds. They should have more coverage of different political parties, and they should not express conflict of interest. So the primary reason for distrust in media in the US is that political polarization and media networks should focus on decreasing polarization and gather people from different affiliations around them, of course, in the ideal case. In that way, the news media becomes a trustworthy source for diverse people and not merely a propaganda tool for specific political actors. Now my teammate will continue with implementation plan.
Now I would like to conclude everything that was said prior and answer the question, how can people trust the media? Firstly, we recommend to make sure that the information you read or trust is not coming from fake news pages. Fake news refers to deliberate untruth or information that comes from, deliberate untruth or information that coming from, that contains some truth, but which are not completely accurate by
Informația în comandă
truthful stories are fake news just because they don't agree with them. So that is why it's important to understand how to separate the real from the fake. And you can do this by following 6 steps that were outlined here. Develop a critical thinking, check the sources, see who else is reporting the story, examine the evidence. Don't take images as they face value and make sure that it sounds right to you. The second recommendation is to check for biases. If you notice any of the following, the source might be biased when it's heavily opinionated or one-sided, relies on unsupported claims, presents highly selected facts that lean to a certain outcome, uses extreme or inappropriate language, and try to persuade you to think in a certain way that with no regard of factual evidence. And the last recommendation is to try not to fall for confirmation bias. Confirmation bias impact how people gather information, but it also impact the way they interpret it and recall the information. For example, people who support or oppose a certain issue will not only seek the information that will not only support the particular issue, but will also seek information that supports their beliefs. They will also interpret news or stories in a way that upholds their existing ideas. And this is our references. Thank you for your attention. That's it.
Thank you too. We will go through the second project, and then we'll come back for questions and everything that relates to that.